The silence after the radio cut out was the kind that made even special operators nervous. The kind that meant something had gone catastrophically wrong, or was about to go impossibly right. In the operations center at Bagram Airfield, 3 Navy SEALs stood motionless behind the Air Force controller, staring at the same flickering screen. They'd requested close air support for a team pinned down in the Kunar Valley, expecting the usual F-16 response, the kind of precision strike that turned mountains into memories. What they got instead was a single call sign that made the controller's hand freeze over his headset. Gravedigger 1-1, inbound your position, 5 mics. The voice was calm, almost bored, with the kind of flat affect that suggested either complete incompetence or absolute mastery. One of the SEALs, a senior chief with 3 deployments and a chest full of medals he never wore, leaned forward. "Gravedigger," he muttered. "That's the A-10 out of Kandahar, the one they were going to ground last month." His teammate, younger but no less experienced, pulled up the aircraft roster on his tablet, his eyes narrowed. "Says here pilot's name is Captain Rhea Delacroix, been flying the Warthog for 8 years, 270 combat sorties." The senior chief grunted. Never heard of her. That was the problem, really. In a community where reputation was currency and call signs were earned through fire, nobody had heard of Gravedigger. No stories in the ready rooms. No legends passed around over whiskey in Kabul safe houses. Just a name on a roster and a jet that was supposedly too old, too slow, and too ugly to matter anymore. The controller spoke into his headset, vectoring the A-10 toward the coordinates where 12 American soldiers were taking fire from 3 sides, trapped in a dried riverbed with no cover and dwindling ammunition. The enemy had high ground, heavy weapons, and no intention of letting anyone leave that valley alive. Gravedigger 1-1, be advised, friendlies are danger close, repeat danger close. Enemy positions on ridgelands north, east, and west. Multiple ZSU-23 emplacements. SAM threat assessed moderate to high. There was a pause, then that same eerily calm voice came back. "Copy danger close. Copy AAA and SAMs. Gravediggers in the groove." One of the SEALs laughed, a short, sharp sound without humor. "She's either crazy or she doesn't understand what she's flying into." The senior chief said nothing. He'd spent enough time in the mountains to know that the space between crazy and competent was sometimes measured in heartbeats. And he'd heard enough radio calls to recognize something in that pilot's voice that made his instincts start whispering. Something that sounded less like bravado and more like certainty. Something that made him think maybe, just maybe, they'd sent the right aircraft after all. The ground team didn't have the luxury of doubt. Lieutenant Marcus Hale pressed himself against the rock wall of the dried riverbed, feeling the vibrations of incoming mortar rounds through his spine before he heard them. His radio operator, Corporal Danny Voss, was bleeding from a shrapnel wound across his shoulder, still trying to maintain comms with a handset slick with blood. Around them, 10 more soldiers returned fire with disciplined bursts, conserving ammunition they didn't have, buying time they couldn't afford. Hale keyed his radio, forcing his voice steady despite the dust and chaos. "Phantom Base, Reaper 2-6. We are combat ineffective in 30 mics without support. Request immediate CAS, how copy?" The response crackled through static. "Reaper 2-6, Gravedigger 1-1, inbound your pose. Authenticate Bravo Charlie 7. Hale fumbed for his authentication card with fingers that wanted to shake. "Gravedigger authenticates Delta Foxtrot 9. We need you to bring the Thunder over." "Roger Reaper. Confirm your smoke color. Purple smoke, north side of riverbed. Enemy positions marked with IR strobes. You should have them on targeting pod." "Negative IR capability, Reaper. I'll be visual." Hale's stomach dropped. No infrared meant the A-10 was carrying older equipment, possibly even older weapons. It meant the pilot would have to come in low, slow, and naked to make positive identification in terrain that ate helicopters for breakfast. He looked at Voss, who'd stopped trying to bandage his shoulder and was staring at the radio like it had just announced his execution. Above the ridgeline, Rhea Delacroix adjusted her throttle, feeling the Warthog shudder as she descended through 8,000 feet. The aircraft around her was a symphony of rattles and groans. 30-year-old titanium and hydraulics held together by maintenance crews who treated each bird like a religious artifact. She loved this jet with the kind of fierce devotion that made other pilots uncomfortable. Loved its ugly snout and ungainly wings, its redundant systems and armored bathtub cockpit. Loved that it was built around a gun so powerful it could slow the aircraft when it fired. She'd named her jet Inevitable after her third deployment, painted in small letters beneath the canopy where regulations said she shouldn't. Because that's what the A-10 was in a close air support fight. Not fast, not stealthy, not pretty, but absolutely inevitable. Her radar warning receiver chirped, then sang, detecting the sweep of anti-aircraft radar from multiple positions. The tactical display showed 3 distinct emplacements, positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. Smart placement, competent enemy. The kind that had killed plenty of American pilots who got overconfident or underlucky. Rhea checked her weapons panel. 1,100 rounds of 30mm ammunition, 6 Maverick missiles, 2,000 pounds of bombs, and fuel enough for 20 minutes on station, maybe 30 if she pushed it. Reaper 2-6, Gravedigger has your purple smoke. Beginning attack run north to south, be advised you're about to get loud. She pushed the stick forward, feeling the jet respond like the old warhorse it was. Down through 6,000 feet, then 5, the mountains rising around her like stone teeth. Her hands were steady on the controls, her breathing measured. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd been doing since before most of the men on the ground had enlisted. This was her language, spoken in gun runs and bomb drops. The first burst came from the eastern ridgeline, ZSU-23 tracers arcing up through the thin mountain air like malevolent fireflies. Rhea saw them early, adjusted her angle by degrees, feeling the jet slice through the space where the tracers weren't. The enemy gunner was good, tracking her descent with the kind of practiced motion that spoke of experience. But Rhea had been doing this since the gunner was probably learning to walk. She rolled inverted, pulled through, came out heading west with the sun behind her. From his position in the riverbed, Hale watched the A-10 emerge from behind the mountain like something from another century. Low and impossibly slow, almost hovering it seemed, nose slightly down in a hunting posture. The aircraft was scarred and weathered, its paint faded from countless missions, its twin engines screaming with a sound that was more industrial than aeronautical. And then it opened fire. The GAU-8 Avenger spoke with a voice that didn't belong in nature. A deep, resonating brrrrt that seemed to shake the air itself. A sound felt in the chest cavity before it registered in the ears. 30mm depleted uranium rounds tore into the eastern ridgeline at 70 per second, each one capable of penetrating tank armor, now shredding rock and earth, and anything biological unlucky enough to be in their path. The ZSU-23 emplacement simply ceased to exist, replaced by a cloud of dust and fragmented stone. Rhea pulled up, banking hard left, already scanning for the next target. The western emplacement opened up, this gunner more cautious, firing shorter bursts to avoid giving away his exact position. Smart, professional, Rhea keyed her radio. Reaper 2-6, Gravedigger, I need your mark on Western Ridge, approximately 100 meters from your smoke. Hale was already moving, hand signals bringing up Sergeant Kelly Marsh with the laser designator. Gravedigger, Reaper, lasing now. The invisible beam touched the rocks where muzzle flash had betrayed the gun position. In her cockpit, Rhea's targeting display caught the reflected energy, computer calculating range and angle with mechanical precision. She armed one Maverick, waited for tone, fired. The missile dropped from her wing, motor igniting, accelerating to supersonic speed in seconds. 98 seconds from launch to impact. The western ridgeline erupted in a fireball that rolled upward like a miniature sunrise. Good hit, Voss shouted into the radio, forgetting procedure in the simple joy of watching your enemy die. But Rhea wasn't listening. She was already tracking the northern emplacement, the one that had stayed silent, the one operated by whoever was smart enough to wait, to watch, to learn from the mistakes of the others. That gunner would shoot when her energy was low, when she was committed to a run and couldn't maneuver. That gunner was the dangerous one. She climbed to 7,000 feet, circling, patient. Below, the ground team was already moving, taking advantage of the temporary reprieve. But temporary was the operative word. The northern gun was still out there, and sooner or later she'd have to deal with it. In the operations center at Bagram, the senior chief watched the drone feed with the intensity of a man whose teammates were depending on pixels and radio calls. The A-10 was a gray blur against the mountain backdrop, barely visible even to the Reaper's high-definition camera. "She's good," the younger SEAL said quietly. It wasn't a question. The senior chief nodded slowly. "She's alive. In that terrain against those guns, that's the same thing." The controller spoke into his headset, updating the tactical picture. Gravedigger 1-1 Phantom Base. We're showing one remaining hostile emplacement, Northern Ridge. Intel suggests possible MANPAD capability. Advise approach with caution. Rhea's response was unhurried, almost conversational. Copy MANPAD threat. Request any available smoke for northern position. On the ground, Hale understood immediately. The pilot wanted the ground team to reveal the gun position, which meant putting someone in the open to throw smoke, which meant someone was about to become a very attractive target. He didn't hesitate. "Marsh, you're up. Green smoke on northern position." Marsh, a 32-year-old from Oklahoma with 2 kids and a wife who wrote letters every week, grabbed the smoke grenade and moved. He was fast, efficient, trained by years of combat to waste no motion. He pulled the pin, threw hard toward the ridgeline, and dove back into cover as machine gun fire chewed up the ground where he'd been standing. Green smoke billowed up, marking the position with theatrical precision. The northern gunner, seeing the smoke and knowing what it meant, made his decision. He fired. Not at the ground team. At the circling A-10. The missile came off the rail with a streak of white exhaust, infrared seeker already locked on the Warthog's hot engine signature. Rhea saw it immediately, her radar warning receiver screaming, her hands already moving through the evasion sequence. Flares popped from dispensers beneath her wings, brilliant magnesium stars falling through the sky. She rolled hard right, pulled up, throttles to maximum. The missile took a flare, detonated 300 feet behind her, close enough that the shockwave rattled her airframe. She felt it through the stick, a sharp jolt like hitting turbulence. But the Warthog was built for this. Redundant systems meant one hydraulic failure didn't mean death. Titanium bathtub meant small arms fire didn't mean catastrophe. And Rhea's training meant panic didn't mean mistakes. She came around again, lower this time, 4,500 feet and descending. The northern gunner had revealed his position with that missile. Now he was target, not threat. She lined up, checked her weapons, and rolled in. The ground rushed up to meet her, mountain peaks level with her wings. She could see individual rocks, scattered trees, the green smoke still billowing from Marsh's grenade. And there, exactly where the smoke indicated, the gun emplacement. She squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 roared again, that distinctive BRRRT that would echo in the valley for seconds after the gun stopped firing. Rhea walked her rounds up the slope, precise corrections turning the ridgeline into a moonscape. The gun emplacement disappeared, replaced by dust and debris. She pulled up hard, max G turn that pushed her into her seat, then leveled off at 6,000 feet. Reaper 2-6, Gravedigger. Northern position is neutralized. You're clear to move. Hale's voice came back, rough with something that might have been emotion or might have just been dust. Gravedigger, Reaper, that was. Thank you. We're moving to extract point now. Rhea checked her fuel gauge. 12 minutes remaining on station. She could stay overhead, make sure they got out clean. Roger, Reaper. Gravedigger's holding overhead. Let me know if anyone else wants to play. Below, the ground team moved with the controlled urgency of professionals who knew the difference between hasty and fast. They carried their wounded, covering each sector, communicating with hand signals and short radio bursts. Voss had his shoulder properly bandaged now, functionally one-armed but still carrying his radio pack. Marsh moved on point, his weapon steady despite hands that wanted to shake. Hale brought up rear, counting his people, checking his 6. In Bagram, the operations center had gone quiet. The SEALs were watching the drone feed, watching the A-10 circle like an iron guardian angel, watching the ground team move towards safety. The younger SEAL pulled up Captain Delacroix's record again, reading details he'd skimmed before. Daughter of a Marine Corps aviator killed in Desert Storm. Graduated top of her flight school class. Turned down F-16 assignments 3 times to fly the A-10. 270 combat sorties, now 271. 0 losses. 0. The senior chief saw what his teammate was reading and grunted. Call sign Gravedigger, now I get it. Why Gravedigger? Because that's what the A-10 does. Digs graves, low, slow, ugly work, the kind nobody wants until they absolutely need it. He paused, still watching the screen. And because she's probably buried more enemy combatants than the rest of her squadron combined. Rhea didn't know they were talking about her, didn't know anyone was watching beyond the tactical necessity. She was focused on her fuel gauge, her tactical display, the ground team's progress toward extract. She was doing the math, calculating whether she had enough gas to wait for the helicopters or whether she'd have to leave before the pickup was complete. The math wasn't good. At 10 minutes remaining, Hale's voice crackled through her headset. Gravedigger, Reaper 2-6. We have visual on extract birds, 2 Black Hawks inbound from south. We're going to make it. Rhea felt something release in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying since the first radio call. Roger Reaper, glad to hear it. Gravedigger's got 5 more minutes overhead, then I'm headed home. Understood, Gravedigger, and we won't forget this. Rhea smiled inside her oxygen mask, a small expression no one would ever see. Just doing my job, Reaper. Stay safe down there. She stayed overhead for exactly 5 more minutes, watching the Black Hawks land, watching the ground team load up, watching the helicopters lift off and accelerate toward safety. Only then did she turn her aircraft east, climbing to cruising altitude, letting the Warthog settle into its most efficient configuration. The flight back to Kandahar was 45 minutes of mountain vistas and sunset colors, the kind of beauty that made you forget, temporarily, why you were carrying guns. Rhea ran through her post-mission checklist with mechanical precision. Weapons safe, systems check, fuel management, everything by the book, everything professional. She landed as the sun touched the horizon, settling onto the runway with its characteristic heavy grace. The crew chief was waiting when she shut down engines, his face carefully neutral in the way that meant he'd heard the radio chatter and was trying not to show emotion. Good flight, Captain. Rhea climbed down from the cockpit, her legs stiff from 4 hours in the seat, her back aching in the way that all A-10 pilots learn to live with. Standard CAS mission, Chief. She performed perfectly. The chief walked around the aircraft, his flashlight finding the scorch marks from the missile's near miss, the new carbon scoring on the nose from gun runs, the usual collection of dings and scrapes that came from flying low and angry. I'll get her ready for tomorrow, ma'am. I know you will, Chief. You always do. Rhea walked toward the operations building, her helmet bag over one shoulder, already mentally preparing her debrief. She'd fill out the forms, describe the mission in dry tactical language, note ammunition expended and aircraft status. She'd reduce 4 hours of combat to bureaucratic necessity, the way pilots had been doing since someone invented paperwork. What she wouldn't write about was the fear in that ground team's voice when they called for help, the relief when she arrived. The gratitude when she left them alive. That wasn't in the forms. That lived somewhere else, in the space between missions where you remembered why you did this job. Inside the operations building, her squadron commander was waiting. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Ashford, a former F-16 pilot who'd reluctantly taken command of an A-10 unit and spent 6 months being surprised by what the Warthog could do. Heard you had an interesting afternoon, Delacroix. Yes, sir. AAA and MA and PADS, danger close CAS, successful extraction. Ashford studied her for a moment, looking for signs of stress, trauma, anything that would require intervention. He found nothing but professional competence and the kind of tired that came from doing your job well. The SEALs at Bagram are apparently very impressed. They specifically asked for your call sign for future missions. Rhea raised an eyebrow. Special operators want the A-10. Times are changing, sir. Maybe they're starting to understand what we've known all along. Sometimes slow and steady wins the race. He paused, "Good work today, Captain. Really good work." "Thank you, sir." She meant it. Recognition from your commander mattered even when you pretended it didn't. The debrief took an hour, the forms took another 30 minutes, and by the time Rhea made it back to her quarters, night had fallen completely over Kandahar airfield. She dropped her gear, kicked off her boots, and lay on her rack staring at the ceiling. This was when it hit, usually. The adrenaline crash, the replay of every decision, every moment where things could have gone catastrophically wrong. The what-ifs and near misses that haunted every combat pilot who was honest enough to admit they felt fear. She thought about the ground team, probably drinking coffee now in some operations center, telling stories that would grow with each retelling. She thought about the enemy gunners, professionals doing their job right up until the moment they died. She thought about her father killed when she was 6 by a SAM over a rock, his F-4 Phantom turning into a fireball that ended with a folded flag and her mother's tears. He'd flown fast jets, the glamorous fighters that everyone wanted. But Rhea had chosen the warthog, chosen the ungainly beast that nobody respected until they needed it. Chosen to be the gravedigger, the one who came low and slow and inevitable when the ground was soaked in blood and someone needed saving. Her phone buzzed, text message from her squadron mate, Captain James Rivera, who flew Gravedigger 1-2. "Heard you made some new friends today. SEALs are buying at the O Club if you're interested." She smiled, typed back. "Not tonight. Early brief tomorrow." "Roger that, good hunting today." "You too." She put the phone aside and closed her eyes. Tomorrow there would be another mission, another grid coordinate where Americans needed help, another enemy position that needed eliminating, another few hours of controlled chaos where the difference between life and death was measured in seconds and angles and decisions made at 300 knots. She was ready for it. She was always ready for it, because that's what being Gravedigger 1-1 meant. Being ready when everyone else had run out of options. Being capable when everyone else had underestimated you. Being there when it mattered most. At Bagram Airfield in a different operations center 200 miles north, the senior chief SEAL was having a beer with his teammate, discussing the day's mission. The drone footage was playing on loop on a laptop between them, showing the A-10's gun runs with clinical precision. "Never seen CAS that close before," the younger SEAL said. She was danger close on every pass. That's what the A-10 does, it's built for it. Low, slow, face-to-face fighting, not like dropping a JDAM from 20,000 feet. The younger man took a drink, watching the missile near miss, watching how the pilot evaded and came back around without hesitation. "Think we should request her for the operation next week." The senior chief considered this, weighing tactical necessity against institutional politics. A-10s weren't popular at the Pentagon. Too old, too slow, too specialized. But guys on the ground loved them because they did exactly one thing better than anything else in the sky. They killed the enemy and kept you alive while doing it. "Yeah," he said finally. "Yeah, let's request Gravedigger. If we're going into the core angle, I want someone overhead who's done this before." "Roger that." They clinked bottles, a small acknowledgement of shared understanding. They'd send the request through channels, and somewhere in the bureaucracy, someone would approve it or deny it based on availability and politics. But they'd asked for her specifically, for Captain Rhea Delacroix and her weathered A-10, because today they'd seen what competence looked like when wrapped in titanium and 30mm ammunition. Back at Kandahar, Rhea was already asleep, her dreams a confused mixture of sky and mountains, and the peculiar silence that followed combat. She wouldn't know about the SEAL request until it came through official channels. Wouldn't know that her call sign was being passed around special operations units as someone reliable, someone you could count on when the world went to hell. She just knew that tomorrow she'd wake up, attend the morning brief, pre-flight her aircraft, and wait for the call that would inevitably come. Because in Afghanistan in 2012, the calls always came. The war had been going on for 11 years, long enough that soldiers were deploying to the same areas their older brothers had fought in. Long enough that the enemy had learned every trick, adapted to every tactic, evolved into something harder to kill. And long enough that the easy victories were all in the past, replaced by grinding persistence, and the knowledge that every day you flew was another day you might not come back. Rhea had made peace with that reality 3 deployments ago. She didn't fly for glory or recognition. She flew because there were Americans on the ground who needed someone overhead, someone competent, someone who wouldn't flinch when the mission got dangerous, someone who'd chosen the Warthog specifically because it was the best tool for the hardest job. The A-10 community was small, tight-knit, made up of pilots who'd deliberately chosen an aircraft that the Air Force kept threatening to retire. They were a strange breed, more interested in ground attack than air-to-air combat, more comfortable at 5,000 feet than 50,000. They flew an aircraft that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts, that sounded like an industrial accident, that couldn't outrun anything built after 1970. And they loved it with a fierce devotion that made fighter pilots shake their heads in confusion. Because the Warthog did one thing better than anything else that flew. It brought people home alive. That was Rhea's religion, her calling, the thing that made sense of all the fear and exhaustion and risk. She'd lost her father to combat aviation, but she'd found her purpose in it too. In the morning, she'd wake up and do it again. The next morning arrived with the usual pre-dawn chaos of a deployed squadron. Rhea was in the operations building by 5:30, reviewing the weather briefing and threat assessment. Afghanistan in late spring meant clear skies and good visibility, perfect flying weather that made close air support both easier and more dangerous. Easier because you could see everything. Dangerous because everything could see you. Lieutenant Colonel Ashford ran the morning briefing with the efficiency of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. Intelligence updates, threat assessment, maintenance status, tactical priorities. He went around the room, assigning aircraft to different areas of responsibility. Gravedigger Flight, you're tasked to support a reconnaissance element in the Korangal Valley. SEAL Team 3 is running an operation targeting high-value individuals. They specifically requested you by call sign. Rhea looked up from her notepad. SEALs didn't usually request specific aircraft. They took what they got and made it work. Someone had put in a request through channels, which meant paperwork and justification and someone's reputation on the line. Understood, sir. What's the threat assessment? Moderate to heavy. The Korangal is always hot. Expect small arms, RPGs, possible MANPADS. Intel suggests the target compound has bunker-like fortifications. SEALs want you overhead in case they need hardened target penetration. That meant bunker-buster bombs, precision work in terrain that didn't forgive mistakes. Rhea nodded. Loadout recommendation. 4 GBU-38s full gun and Mavericks for flexibility. This isn't CAS, it's on-call precision strike. They want you overhead but not engaged unless necessary. Copy that, sir. The briefing continued. Other pilots getting their assignments. The usual discussion of procedures and weather and backup plans. When it ended, Rhea walked out to the flight line where her crew chief had Gravedigger 1-1 ready and waiting. The A-10 looked particularly ugly in the morning light. Its camouflage paint faded to indistinct gray-green, its twin engines mounted high on the fuselage like afterthoughts. The nose was long and drooping, giving the aircraft a perpetually tired expression. The wings were straight and ungainly, festooned with pylons carrying bombs and missiles. It looked slow. It looked old. It looked like exactly what it was, a purpose-built killing machine designed to survive and deliver ordnance in the worst possible conditions. Rhea loved every rivet. She ran her pre-flight inspection with thorough attention, checking flight control surfaces, inspecting ordnance, verifying hydraulic systems. The crew chief shadowed her, answering questions, pointing out minor issues that had been addressed overnight. She's ready, Captain. Good jet today. They're all good jets, Chief. We're just lucky enough to fly them. She climbed the ladder into the cockpit, settled into the seat that had molded itself to her body over hundreds of hours. The cockpit was cramped, functional, packed with switches and displays that looked archaic compared to modern fighters. But Rhea knew every system intimately, could troubleshoot any problem, could fly this aircraft with instinct as much as training. She ran through her startup checklist, engines spooling up with their characteristic whine, systems coming online one by one. When everything was green, she called for taxi clearance. Kandahar ground, Gravedigger 1-1, ready to taxi with information Delta. Gravedigger 11, Kandahar ground, taxi to runway 23 via taxiway Alpha. Winds 240 at 8 knots. The A-10 rolled forward, its nose gear steering responsive despite the aircraft's weight. Rhea taxied past rows of helicopters and fighters, past cargo planes being loaded with supplies, past the organized chaos of a forward operating base that never truly slept. At the runway, she ran her final checks, confirmed her flight plan, and waited for takeoff clearance. Gravedigger 11, Kandahar Tower, winds 230 at 10 knots, runway 23, cleared for takeoff. Cleared for takeoff, runway 23, Gravedigger 11. She advanced the throttles smoothly, feeling the Warthog accelerate with its characteristic reluctance. The aircraft wasn't fast, but it was powerful, twin engines pushing 20,000 pounds of thrust against a runway that shimmered with heat. At rotation speed, she pulled back gently, and the A-10 lifted off with the grace of a freight train learning to fly. Gear up, flaps up, climb attitude. The airfield fell away beneath her, replaced by mountains and valleys and terrain that had killed pilots less careful than she was. She turned northwest, toward the Korangal Valley, toward whatever awaited there. The flight took 40 minutes, cruising at 18,000 feet where the air was thin and cold. Below her, Afghanistan unrolled in shades of brown and gray and occasional green where rivers cut through the mountains. It was beautiful in a harsh way, the kind of landscape that didn't care whether you lived or died, that had been swallowing armies for thousands of years. At 15 minutes out, she contacted the SEAL element. Python element Gravedigger 11 checking in as fragged, ready for tasking. A different voice than yesterday's ground team, this one with the clipped precision of a senior NCO who'd done this too many times to waste words. Gravedigger Python, good to have you overhead. Stand by for situation update. Rhea circled at altitude, running systems checks, verifying weapons status. Everything green, everything ready. Gravedigger Python, we are moving to target building in approximately 20 mics. Structure is reinforced concrete, likely civilian construction but hardened. We will attempt entry but may require precision strike on secondary structure if target barricades inside primary position. Roger Python. Gravedigger carries 4 GBU-38s with precision guidance, can deliver on primary or secondary as directed. Solid copy. Python will update as situation develops. Be advised, sporadic small arms in area, no heavy weapons confirmed. Roger, small arms only. Gravediggers holding at Angels 20, Angels 20. 20,000 feet, high enough to be safe from everything but missiles, low enough to dive quickly if needed. Rhea settled in for what might be a long wait. SEAL operations didn't run on schedule. They ran on opportunity and careful planning and the willingness to abort if conditions weren't perfect. She might be overhead for 30 minutes or 3 hours. Either way, she'd be ready when they needed her. Below, invisible to her at this altitude, the SEAL element was moving through terrain that had earned the Korangal Valley its nickname, the Valley of Death. It was steep, heavily forested in places, with villages clinging to impossible slopes and trails that dated back centuries. The SEAL team leader, Senior Chief Marcus Wright, moved with his element using hand signals and absolute noise discipline. 12 operators, the best trained soldiers America produced, carrying weapons worth more than luxury cars and communications equipment that cost more than houses. They'd been hunting this particular high-value target for 3 weeks, tracking him through signals intelligence and human sources, narrowing his location to this specific compound in this specific valley. Wright keyed his radio, voice barely above a whisper. Python element set security, wait for my mark. The team spread out, each operator taking a position that provided overlapping fields of fire and mutual support. They'd rehearsed this for 3 days on a mock-up back at Bagram, running through scenarios until everyone knew their role without thinking. Now came the part where planning met reality. Python 6, Python 2. We have movement in secondary structure, 1 military-age male armed with AK variant. Wright checked his sight picture through his scope. 75 meters to the target compound. Two buildings, one concrete and reinforced, the other more traditional construction. Guards outside, but not many, either confidence or stupidity. All Python elements prepare to move on my mark. Above, at 20,000 feet, Rhea flew a lazy circle, her targeting pod slave to the coordinates Python had provided. She could see the compound through the pod's camera, watch the heat signatures of people moving between buildings. She counted guards, noted firing positions, calculated angles of attack if it came to that. Her fingers rested lightly on the weapon's controls, ready but not committed. Professional patience learned through hundreds of missions where urgency had to be balanced against precision. Gravedigger, Python 6, we're moving to primary structure now. Stand by for possible tasking. Roger Python, Gravedigger's ready. Wright made his decision. Hand signal. The team moved. They covered the open ground in seconds, flowing like water around obstacles, each operator covering his sector with absolute discipline. The door to the primary structure was reinforced steel, the kind that didn't yield to battering rams. The breacher placed his charge with practiced efficiency, shaped explosive designed to cut through metal without excessive fragmentation. Breach in 3, 2, 1. The explosion was sharp and controlled, the door sagging inward. The team flowed through the opening, weapons up, moving to contact. What they found was an empty room with 3 exits and the sound of footsteps retreating deeper into the structure. Python 6, Python 2. Primary structure is maze-like, multiple rooms. Target is maneuvering. This was the nightmare scenario. Room-to-room fighting in unfamiliar terrain against an enemy who knew every corner. Wright made his assessment in seconds. Python elements fall back to breach point. We're not chasing him through his own warren. Outside, back in defensive positions, Wright keyed his radio to Gravedigger's frequency. Gravedigger, Python 6. Target has barricaded inside primary structure. We need precision strike, danger close. How copy? At 20,000 feet, Rhea felt her pulse steady rather than quicken. This was why SEALs requested her specifically, not for air-to-air combat or speed records. For this exact scenario, where someone needed a bomb placed with surgical precision while Americans were standing close enough to feel the shockwave. Python 6, Gravedigger. Copy, danger close, precision strike. We'll need your team to mark safe corridor and confirm no friendlies in structure. Roger, Gravedigger. All Python elements are clear of primary structure, marking safe corridor with IR strobe now. Through her targeting pod, Rhea saw the infrared strobe appear, invisible to the naked eye but brilliant through her sensors. The SEALs were 75 meters from the target building, behind cover, but still close enough that this required absolute precision. She ran her calculations. 500-pound GPS-guided bomb. Circular error probable of 1 meter. She'd need to account for wind, release altitude, the building's construction. 1 meter error was acceptable. 2 meters might kill friendlies. She couldn't afford 2 meters. Python 6, Gravedigger. Confirm structure construction, concrete thickness if known. Gravedigger, Python. Intel says reinforced concrete, approximately 8 inches, steel rebar. Standard civilian construction with hardening. Copy. Stand by. Rhea selected 1 GBU-38, armed it, set the fusing for delayed detonation. The bomb would penetrate the roof, fall through to the first floor or basement, then detonate. Maximum structural damage, contained blast effects. She rolled in, descending through 18,000 feet, the warthog's nose dropping toward the earth. The targeting pod stayed locked on the coordinates, computer calculating 1,000 variables, waiting for that perfect moment when mathematics and physics aligned. At 12,000 feet, she hit the release. The bomb fell away cleanly, fins deploying, guidance system activating. It fell for 28 seconds, making micro-adjustments to its trajectory, correcting for wind and air density and the rotation of the Earth itself. When it hit the roof of the target compound, it punched through concrete and rebar like they were cardboard. 1 second later, in the interior of the structure, 500 pounds of high explosive detonated. The building didn't collapse so much as transform. One moment it was standing, the next it was a cloud of pulverized concrete and dust, walls imploding, roof falling. the entire structure folding in on itself with the weight of its own destruction. The shockwave rolled across the valley, sounding like thunder delivered at close range. 75 meters away, behind their cover positions, the SEALs felt the pressure wave wash over them, felt the ground shake, saw the mushroom cloud of debris rise into the morning air. When the dust began to settle, the primary structure was simply gone, replaced by rubble and twisted rebar and the peculiar silence that follows extreme violence. Gravedigger, Python 6. Wright's voice was steady, professional. That's a direct hit. Target building is destroyed. Outstanding work. Rhea pulled up from her attack run, climbing back to altitude, already scanning for threats, already running through her post-attack checklist. 1 bomb expended, 3 remaining, still plenty of gas, still ready if they needed her again. Roger, Python, happy to help. Gravediggers holding overhead, 3 GBUs remaining if needed. Negative, Gravedigger. Pythons moving to confirm target elimination. Stand by for battle damage assessment. Below, the SEAL element moved toward the destroyed building with professional caution. You never assumed everyone was dead until you confirmed it personally. They approached from multiple angles, weapons ready, covering each other with the practiced efficiency of hundreds of training repetitions made real. The building was thoroughly destroyed. Walls reduced to rubble. Roof collapsed. Interior spaces exposed to open air. In the center of the devastation, they found what they'd come for. The high-value target killed by the combination of explosive force and structural collapse. Wright took photos with his tactical camera, confirmed identity through biometric data, completed the evidence chain that would satisfy intelligence requirements. Gravedigger, Python 6. Target is confirmed killed. Mission complete. Excellent work. Roger, Python. Glad everyone's safe. Gravediggers available for extract cover if needed. Negative, Gravedigger. We have ground extract lined up. But we appreciate the offer, and will definitely be calling again. Rhea smiled inside her oxygen mask. That was operator speak for "you're on our short list now." It meant the next time they needed precision air support, they'd ask for her specifically. It meant her reputation was building, 1 mission at a time, 1 successful strike at a time. She turned south, toward Kandahar, toward debrief and paperwork and maybe a few hours of sleep before the next mission. The flight back was uneventful, the kind of peaceful transit that made you remember why flying was beautiful when you weren't shooting at people. She landed at Kandahar in early afternoon, the runway shimmering with heat, the crew chief waiting with his usual careful neutrality. "How'd she perform, Captain?" "Perfectly, Chief. Dropped 1 GBU textbook delivery. She's ready to go again whenever you are." "Always, ma'am, always." The debrief took longer this time. Lieutenant Colonel Ashford wanted details, wanted to understand the decision process, wanted to know how she'd calculated danger-close parameters with friendlies that close to the target. Rhea walked him through it step by step, using tactical diagrams and ballistic tables, explaining the geometry of her attack run and the precision of GPS-guided weapons. When she finished, Ashford leaned back in his chair, studying her with the expression of someone reassessing their assumptions. The SEAL Element Commander sent a personal commendation through channels, said you were the most professional CAS he'd worked with in 3 deployments. Rhea kept her face neutral, but something warm moved in her chest. "Just doing my job, sir." "Well, apparently you're doing it better than most. He specifically requested you for their next operation in 5 days." "I'll be ready, sir." That evening in the dining facility, Rhea sat with her fellow A-10 pilots, the small community of warthog drivers who understood what she did in ways that other aviators never would. Captain James Rivera, her wingman, raised his coffee cup in mock salute. "Heard you're the SEAL's new favorite pilot. Going to forget all us regular folks?" "Never. Someone has to keep you entertained." Rivera laughed, but there was genuine respect in his eyes. "Seriously, though, danger close precision strike. That's expert-level stuff. Not many pilots could have made that shot." "Any of us could have," Rhea said quietly. "We're trained for it, it's what the jet does." "Maybe, but being able to and actually doing it when lives depend on it, that's different." He paused. "Your dad would be proud." Rhea looked down at her tray, not trusting herself to respond immediately. Rivera was one of the few who knew her history, knew why she flew, knew the ghost she carried. "Thanks," she said finally. "That means something." The conversation moved on to other topics, other missions, the usual shop talk of combat aviators trying to process what they did for a living. But Rhea's mind was elsewhere, thinking about the building she'd destroyed that morning, the target eliminated, the SEALs who'd gone home safe. Thinking about her father, killed doing similar work in a different war. Thinking about the sitting on the flight line, ugly and old and absolutely lethal in the right hands. She'd chosen this path deliberately, knowing it was dangerous, knowing it was underappreciated, knowing the Air Force would rather invest in sleek fighters than ungainly ground attack aircraft. But she'd chosen it because this was where she could make the most difference, where her training and instinct and willingness to fly low and slow could save American lives. That night, back in her quarters, she wrote an email to her mother. Not about the danger or the missions, but about the small things. The sunset over the mountains. The crew chief's dedication. The feeling of doing work that mattered. Her mother would read between the lines, would understand what Rhea couldn't say directly. That she was safe, that she was good at this, that her father's death hadn't been in vain because she'd taken the lessons he'd never lived to teach her and turned them into something meaningful. She hit send and lay back on her rack, staring at the ceiling. 5 days until the next SEAL mission. 5 days of routine flights and combat air patrols and the grinding persistence of war that never seemed to end. But for now, for tonight, she could rest knowing she'd done her job well. Knowing somewhere in this country, 12 American special operators were alive because she'd been overhead when they needed her. That was enough. That had to be enough. Because tomorrow the war would continue and she'd wake up and do it again, and keep doing it until either the war ended or she did. That was the bargain she'd made with herself the day she climbed into her first A-10. To be the gravedigger, the one who came when called, the one who didn't flinch when the mission got hard. 5 days passed in the usual rhythm of deployed operations. Rhea flew combat air patrols, provided overwatch for convoy movements, sat on strip alert waiting for missions that didn't materialize. She maintained her aircraft, attended briefings, exercised in the gym where pilots tried to stay combat-ready despite the monotony of deployment routine. On the 5th day, Lieutenant Colonel Ashford called her into his office. The SEAL mission was on for that evening, a night operation targeting a Taliban commander in the Pech River Valley. High risk, high reward, and they'd specifically requested Gravedigger 1-1. "This one's different," Ashford said, spreading a map across his desk. "They're going in at night, small element, relying on surprise and speed. They want you overhead but with specific restrictions. No engine noise, no visible presence until they call for fire support." Rhea studied the map, nodding the terrain, the target compound's location, the extract routes. Night CAS with noise discipline. That means high altitude hold until needed. "Exactly. Can you work with that?" "Yes, sir, but if they need me, response time will be longer coming from altitude." They understand the trade-off. They'd rather maintain surprise than have immediate response until things go kinetic. Rhea nodded. It was a calculated risk, the kind special operators made routinely. They'd trade response time for tactical surprise, betting their lives that they could complete the mission before needing air support. And if they did need her, she'd have to dive from altitude in the dark, find targets in terrain that looked identical at night, deliver precision fires without fratricide. Standard stuff, really, except everything was harder at night. "I'm in, sir. What's the loadout?" "Mixed package. 2 GBU-38s for hardened targets, full gun, Mavericks for vehicles. And they want you carrying alum rounds in case they need battlefield illumination." Illumination rounds. Artillery shells designed to light up the battlefield with parachute flares. The A-10 could carry them in practice, but few pilots ever deployed with them in combat. It meant the SEALs were planning for contingencies that involved fighting in the dark without night vision advantage. "Understood, sir. When's brief?" 1900 hours. Take off at 21:30. On station time 2200. The ground element inserts at 22:15. Rhea checked her watch. 3 hours to pre-flight brief and get airborne. "I'll be ready, sir." The brief was thorough, conducted by Senior Chief Wright himself via secure video link from Bagram. He walked through the mission step by step, noting primary and alternate objectives, extract plans, abort criteria. His team would infiltrate on foot, approaching the target compound from the north using a dry wadi for concealment. Intelligence suggested the Taliban commander had between 5 and 10 guards, possibly more. The compound was traditional construction, not reinforced, but the terrain provided natural defensive advantages. "Gravedigger," Wright said, looking directly at the camera, "we need you overhead but quiet until we call. If this goes perfectly, you won't fire a shot. If it goes wrong, we'll need everything you've got." Rhea took off into darkness, the runway lights of Kandahar falling away as she climbed through the night sky. Afghanistan at night was a different world, mostly dark except for scattered lights marking villages and forward operating bases. The mountains were invisible shadows against a starlit sky, dangerous and beautiful in equal measure. She climbed to 25,000 feet, high enough that her engine noise wouldn't carry to the ground, and began her orbit over the target area. From this altitude, even with night vision systems, she could barely see the terrain below. She relied on her instruments, her GPS, her tactical display showing friendly and enemy positions as colored icons on a digital map. At 22:15, Wright's voice came through her headset, barely audible whisper. "Gravedigger, Python 6. Ground element is moving to target now. Maintain silent watch." "Roger, Python." Gravedigger's high and quiet. She watched through her targeting pod as the SEAL element moved toward the compound, 12 thermal signatures advancing with professional stealth. They reached the outer wall, paused, then flowed over it like smoke. Seconds passed. Minutes. The tension was palpable even at 5 miles altitude, the knowledge that men were in close contact with the enemy, that gunfire could erupt at any moment. Then Wright's voice, no longer whispering. "Gravedigger, Python. We're in contact, multiple hostiles, requesting immediate gun run on compound courtyard, danger close. Friendlies are inside primary structure." Rhea didn't hesitate. She rolled inverted, pulled through, dove toward the earth. From 25,000 feet to gun range in 90 seconds, the Warthog falling like a controlled meteor. Her targeting pod showed the courtyard, showed muzzle flashes from multiple positions, showed the thermal signatures of the SEAL element inside the building engaging targets. At 8,000 feet, she rolled level, lined up, verified friendlies were clear. "Python, Gravediggers and hot on courtyard, confirm friendlies are inside primary structure." "Confirmed. All Python elements are inside, clear to engage." She squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 roared, tracers reaching down through the darkness like the finger of an angry god. 30mm rounds tore into the courtyard at 70 per second, turning earth and stone and flesh into chaos. She walked the fire across the space where enemy combatants had been maneuvering, 3 seconds of sustained fire that expended 210 rounds and transformed the battlefield. "Python, Gravediggers off target, BDA." "Gravedigger, Python. Courtyard is clear, you got them all. We're moving to extract now, stay overhead." "Roger, Gravediggers holding high." She climbed back to altitude, circling, watching the SEAL element extract from the compound. They moved quickly now, surprise was gone, speed was everything. They had their target, had confirmation of kill, and were headed toward the extract point 300 meters to the north. That's when the technical appeared. A pickup truck with a machine gun mounted in the bed, racing down the road toward the extract point. Someone had heard the gunfire, was coming to investigate or reinforce. Either way, they'd arrive before the SEALs reached safety. "Gravedigger, Python, technical approaching from south will interdict our extract. Request immediate engagement." Rhea was already rolling in, selecting a Maverick missile, getting tone. The truck was moving fast, bouncing over rough road, but the missile didn't care about movement. It cared about heat signature and targeting solution, and the truck's engine provided both. "Python, Gravedigger's rifle on technical." The Maverick dropped from her wing, motor igniting, accelerating to supersonic speed. It covered the distance in 8 seconds, impacting the truck's engine compartment with precise violence. The vehicle exploded, flipped, rolled off the road in a tumbling mess of metal and fire. The machine gun went silent. "Gravedigger, Python, good kill. Extract is clear. We're moving to pickup point now." Wright paused. "You just saved our lives, again." Rhea climbed back to her holding pattern, watching the SEAL element reach the pickup zone where 2 helicopters were already inbound. She maintained overwatch until the Black Hawks landed, loaded, and departed, only then turning toward Kandahar. The flight back was quiet, just her and the Warthog and the darkness. She ran through her mental debrief, reviewing decisions, noting ammunition expended. 210 rounds of 30, 1 Maverick missile, 0 friendly casualties. Mission success. She landed at 1:30, the crew chief waiting despite the late hour, checking her aircraft for damage, refueling and rearming for tomorrow's missions. Another good flight, Captain. Another successful mission, Chief. She performed flawlessly. They always do, ma'am. It's the pilots that make the difference. Rhea smiled, too tired to disagree. Get some sleep, Chief. Tomorrow's another day. You too, ma'am, you too. The debrief could wait until morning. Rhea went straight to her quarters, kicked off her boots, and collapsed on her rack, still in her flight suit. Sleep came quickly, dreamless and deep, the exhaustion of combat operations overriding everything else. She woke 6 hours later to her alarm and the realization that she had 2 messages on her phone. One from Lieutenant Colonel Ashford. SEAL Team 3 has requested you for all future operations. Coordinate with Ops. The other from Senior Chief Wright, sent through official channels but personal in tone. Gravedigger, Python 6. When we brief young SEALs on what air support should look like, we're going to tell them about you. Fair winds and following seas. Rhea read the message twice, feeling something shift in her chest. Recognition from special operators meant something different than awards or commendations. It meant they trusted you with their lives. It meant when things went bad, they wanted you overhead. It meant she'd become the kind of pilot her father had been, the kind people told stories about. She got up, showered, dressed, and headed to the operations building for the morning brief. Another day, another mission, another chance to be the gravedigger, the one who came when called. The recognition was nice, but the work was what mattered. The Americans on the ground who needed her overhead. The crew chiefs who maintained her aircraft. The other pilots who flew the same missions with the same risks. Over the next 3 weeks, Rhea flew 11 more missions with SEAL elements. Not all were combat. Some were pure overwatch, circling at altitude while operators conducted reconnaissance or met with local contacts. Some were show of force, low passes designed to remind local Taliban that American air power was nearby. And some were kinetic, close-quarters firefights where the difference between success and catastrophe was measured in seconds and weapons accuracy. Her reputation spread beyond SEAL Team 3. Other special operations units started requesting her. Marine Raiders running operations in Helmand Province. Army Special Forces teams in Kandahar Province. Even Delta Force operators, though they never identified themselves as such over unsecure communications. The requests came through Lieutenant Colonel Ashford, who started keeping a running list of units that wanted Gravedigger 11 specifically. You're becoming famous, he said one morning, showing her the list. Every special operations element in theater wants you on call. Rhea studied the list, uncomfortable with the attention. They just want consistent air support, sir. Someone they can rely on. Maybe, but reliability in combat is the same as excellence, and you've proven both. He paused. I'm putting you in for a distinguished flying cross. Senior Chief Wright and 2 other ground commanders submitted statements supporting the nomination. Rhea felt her stomach drop. The DFC was serious recognition, the kind that changed careers, that followed you for the rest of your service. Sir, I'm just doing my job. Every pilot in this squadron could do what I do. But they're not. You are. And you're doing it better than anyone I've seen in 20 years of combat aviation. Ashford's voice softened slightly. Your father would be proud, Captain. I served with him in Desert Storm. He was one of the finest pilots I ever knew, and you're following in his footsteps. Rhea looked down, not trusting her voice. She'd never known that Ashford had served with her father, had never known that connection existed. Thank you, sir. That means a lot. He died doing this work, protecting people on the ground, and now you're doing the same thing in a different war. Ashford straightened. Anyway, the DFC will take months to process. Until then, keep doing what you're doing. We need you out there. That evening, Rhea sat in her quarters writing another email to her mother. This time she told her about the DFC nomination, about the special operators who requested her, about how the work felt meaningful in ways she struggled to articulate. She didn't mention the danger, the near misses, the missiles that came close, the gun runs that required her to fly through enemy fire. Her mother knew the risks, had lived with them when Rhea's father was deployed, had received the knock on the door that every military spouse dreaded. Instead, Rhea focused on the positive: the crew chief's dedication, the other pilots' camaraderie, the feeling of bringing people home alive. When she finished the email, she walked out to the flight line where her A-10 sat under the stars. The crew chief was there, performing routine maintenance, his flashlight illuminating panels and access ports. Evening, Chief. Working late. The chief looked up, not surprised to see her. Pilots often visited their aircraft at odd hours, checking on their birds, maintaining the personal connection that made the difference between flying a machine and trusting your life to a partner. Just the usual, ma'am. Checking hydraulics, topping off fluids. She's ready for tomorrow. Rhea walked around the aircraft slowly, running her hand along the fuselage, feeling the patches where damage had been repaired, the rivets that held everything together. The A-10 was scarred and weathered, but it was still flying, still fighting, like her, like everyone who'd chosen this path. Chief, can I ask you something? Of course, ma'am. Why the Warthog? You could maintain fighters, work on newer aircraft. Why stick with an old platform that everyone says is obsolete? The chief was quiet for a moment, his flashlight illuminating the aircraft's belly. Because it brings people home, ma'am. Every time I send this jet out, I know it's going to protect Americans on the ground. Can't say that about fighters. They do their job, sure, but this jet saves lives. And the pilots who fly it like you, they do it better than anyone. He paused. My son's a Marine infantryman deployed to Helmand last month. If he gets in trouble, I want someone like you overhead, someone in a jet like this. That's why I do this job. Rhea felt tears prick her eyes but didn't let them fall. We'll keep bringing them home, Chief. Your son included. I know you will, ma'am. I've seen you fly. She stayed there for a while longer, standing beside her aircraft under the Afghan stars, thinking about the crew chief's son and all the other Americans scattered across this country who depended on people like her. Thinking about her father, wondering if he'd felt this same weight, this same pride, this same exhaustion. Eventually, she walked back to her quarters and slept dreamlessly, already mentally preparing for tomorrow's mission. Because that's what this life was, a continuous cycle of mission, recovery, preparation, repeat, until the deployment ended or you did. 4 weeks into her deployment, the call came that every combat pilot trained for but hoped would never happen. An American convoy had hit an IED in the Tangi Valley, sustaining casualties, now under heavy fire from multiple positions. They needed immediate close air support, danger close, with wounded on the ground who couldn't be moved. Rhea was on strip alert, sitting in her cockpit with engines running when the call came through. Gravedigger 11 scrambled to grid Delta Quebec 7942, American convoy in contact, mass casualty situation, immediate CAS required. She was rolling before the controller finished speaking. Gravedigger 11 rolling now. Authenticate. Gravedigger authenticates Foxtrot Lima 6. Roger authenticated. Gravediggers en route ETA 15 mics. 15 minutes. In a fighter it would be 6. But the A-10 wasn't built for speed, it was built for what came next. Rhea pushed her throttles to maximum continuous power, the Warthog accelerating to its top speed of 380 knots. Not fast by any standard, but fast enough. She checked her weapons load. Full gun. 6 Mavericks. 4 GBU-38s. She'd need everything. At 10 minutes out, the convoy commander came up on her frequency. His voice was tight with stress and pain. Gravedigger, Hammer 26. We've got 3 vehicles immobilized, 4 KIA, 6 wounded who can't move. Enemy positions on high ground east and west, approximately 200 meters from our location. We're pinned down and running low on ammunition. Rhea could hear gunfire in the background, the flat crack of AK-47s and the deeper thump of RPGs. Hammer 26, Gravedigger, I'm 10 mics out. Can you mark your position and enemy locations? Roger, Gravedigger, popping red smoke now. Enemy positions are anything that shoots at you from the high ground. Danger close authorized, we're out of options. Red smoke. Danger close authorized. That meant the convoy was desperate enough to accept the risk of friendly fire if it meant stopping the enemy. Rhea descended through 10,000 feet, scanning for the convoy. She found it quickly, 3 smoking vehicles in a dried riverbed, soldiers taking cover behind whatever protection they could find. The high ground on both sides was alive with muzzle flashes. She made her assessment in seconds. The enemy had good positions, good fields of fire, and numerical advantage. The convoy was trapped, taking casualties, and would be overrun within minutes if something didn't change. Something had to change. Rhea rolled in from the north, lining up on the eastern ridgeline. Her targeting pod showed at least a dozen enemy fighters, dug into fighting positions, well-disciplined and clearly experienced. Hammer 2-6, gravediggers in hot on eastern ridge. Keep your heads down. She opened fire. The GAU-8 roared with its characteristic BRRRT, tracers reaching down like lines of fire drawn by an angry god. The ridgeline erupted in dust and debris and screaming men who'd never expected this kind of violence delivered at this speed. She held the trigger for 4 seconds, 8 seconds, walking her rounds along the enemy positions with methodical precision. When she pulled off, half the eastern ridge was silent, but the western ridge was still firing, still pouring automatic weapons fire into the convoy. Rhea rolled right, came around again, already selecting targets. A technical truck with a heavy machine gun, a mortar position, clusters of infantry. She fired a Maverick at the technical, watched it explode. Rolled in with guns on the mortar position, pulled up and circled, looking for what came next. Gravedigger Hammer 2-6, you're breaking their attack, they're pulling back from eastern positions. But pulling back wasn't enough. Rhea could see them regrouping, maneuvering to better positions. If she left now, they'd return the moment she was gone. The convoy would still be trapped, still vulnerable. Hammer 2-6, Gravedigger, I'm not leaving until you're safe. Medical evacuation inbound. Medevac is 1-5, mic's out. Can you stay overhead? Roger Hammer, I'll stay as long as you need me. For the next 15 minutes, Rhea flew a pattern over the convoy, showing herself, making herself visible. She was daring the enemy to shoot at her, drawing their fire away from the convoy. And they obliged. Small arms tracers reached up toward her, glowing green lines that looked slow from altitude but traveled at supersonic speed. She took hits. Nothing critical, nothing that penetrated the titanium bathtub protecting her cockpit, but hits nonetheless. She felt them as small jolts through the airframe, heard the impact of bullets on metal. The A-10 absorbed them and kept flying, doing exactly what it was designed to do. When the medevac helicopters arrived, escorted by Apache gunships, Rhea provided top cover while they loaded casualties. She watched through her targeting pod as wounded soldiers were carried to the Black Hawks, watched the helicopters lift off and accelerate toward safety. Only when they were clear, only when the convoy was moving again under Apache escort, did she turn toward Kandahar. The damage assessment came in during her return flight. 14 bullet holes in her aircraft, 2 in the right engine cowling, 3 in the right wing, 9 in the fuselage. Nothing critical, nothing that compromised flight safety. The A-10 had taken the punishment and kept her alive. She landed with emergency equipment standing by as a precaution, but the landing was routine. The crew chief met her with an expression somewhere between horror and pride, looking at the bullet holes like they were personal insults. "Ma'am, they shot you." Rhea climbed down from the cockpit, her legs unsteady from adrenaline crash. "They tried, Chief. The jet did its job." "Yes, ma'am, it did. But I'm going to need 3 days to patch her up." "You'll be flying 1-2 until then." "Understood. Take care of her, Chief. She took care of me." The debrief was intense. Lieutenant Colonel Ashford wanted every detail, every decision, every round expended. When Rhea finished, he sat back in his chair, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The convoy commander is recommending you for a Silver Star. He says you saved at least 6 lives by staying overhead and drawing fire." Rhea shook her head. "I was just doing my job, sir. Any pilot would have done the same." "Maybe, but you're the one who did it. You're the one they're going to remember." He paused. "Take tomorrow off, rest, decompress. You've earned it." "Sir, I'm fine to fly." "That's an order, Captain. Take the day off." Rhea recognized the tone that meant argument was futile. "Yes, sir." That night she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the mission, seeing the bullet holes in her aircraft, remembering the sound of rounds impacting metal. She'd been shot at before, but this was different. This was sustained fire, deliberate targeting, the enemy trying to kill her specifically. And the A-10 had saved her life. She thought about her father, shot down over Iraq, his jet not as survivable as the Warthog. She thought about the crew chief's son in Helmand. She thought about the convoy soldiers who'd gone home because she stayed overhead. Eventually, she got up and walked to the operations building where the 24-hour operations staff monitored ongoing missions. She found a quiet corner and pulled up the after-action report from the convoy attack. 4 soldiers killed by the initial IED. 6 wounded, 3 critically. But after she arrived, 0 additional casualties. The convoy had survived because she'd been overhead. The next day, her mandatory day off, Rhea spent time with the crew chiefs learning about her aircraft's damage and repair. The chief walked her through each bullet hole, explaining what had been hit, what had protected her, why the aircraft kept flying when most others would have gone down. "See this hole here, ma'am. Bullet went clean through the right engine nacelle, missed everything critical by 3 inches. This one hit your right wing spar, hit a rib, deflected away from the fuel tank. You were lucky, but the jet's design gave you that luck." Rhea traced the bullet holes with her finger, feeling the jagged edges of torn metal. "How long has this airframe been flying?" "This particular bird was built in 1979, ma'am. Been through Desert Storm Bosnia, 3 rotations to Afghanistan before this one. She's old, but she's tough. They all are. 46 years old. Older than Rhea. Older than most of the pilots flying her. And still doing the job, still protecting pilots, still bringing them home." That evening, Rivera found her in the dining facility, sitting alone with a tray of food she wasn't eating. "Mind if I join you?" "Sure." He sat studying her with the careful assessment of someone who'd flown enough combat to recognize post-mission processing when he saw it. "Want to talk about yesterday?" "Not really." "Okay." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the dining facility noise washing over them. Finally, Rhea spoke. "I keep thinking about those soldiers. The ones who died before I got there. If I'd been on strip alert 5 minutes earlier, if I'd flown a little faster." "Don't." Rivera's voice was firm. "Don't play that game. You can't save everyone. You can only do your best with the time you have." "I know. Intellectually, I know that, but it doesn't feel like enough." "It never does. That's what makes you good at this job. The day it feels like enough is the day you should stop flying." He paused. "But yesterday, you saved 6 lives. You drew fire away from wounded soldiers. You stayed overhead when most pilots would have climbed to safety. That has to count for something." Rhea looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "It does. It just doesn't erase the 4 who died." "No, nothing erases that. But you honor them by doing your job so well that fewer people die tomorrow. That's all any of us can do." They finished their meal, then walked out to the flight line where the A-10 sat in their revetments, dark shapes against the evening sky. Rhea found her aircraft, still being repaired, sheets of metal being riveted over bullet holes. "She's going to be ready day after tomorrow," Rivera said. "Chief told me he's working double shifts to get her back in service." "He doesn't need to do that." "Try telling him. His son's out there somewhere, remember. He wants every A-10 in the air, protecting every soldier on the ground." Rhea nodded, understanding the chief's motivation. Everyone had their reason for being here, their personal stake in the war. For her, it was honoring her father's memory. For the chief, it was protecting his son. For Rivera, it was probably something else entirely. They all had their reasons, and those reasons kept them going through the fear and exhaustion and moral weight of combat operations. 2 days later, Rhea was back in the air, flying Gravedigger 11 with its fresh repairs and new coat of paint over the patched bullet holes. The jet felt good, responsive, reliable, like coming home to something familiar. Her mission was routine: combat air patrol over Helmand Province, providing overwatch for marine operations in Sangin District. She checked in with the ground controller, established her patrol pattern, and settled in for what she expected would be an uneventful 4 hours. She was wrong. At 2 hours into her patrol, the radio exploded with traffic. A Marine platoon had walked into an ambush in Sangin's northern sector, taking fire from 3 sides, with casualties already reported. They needed immediate close air support, but the airspace was complicated. British fast movers were already engaged to the east, artillery was firing to the south, and attack helicopters were working the western sector. The only gap in the coverage was directly overhead the Marines, and that gap required precision flying in congested airspace with multiple friendly elements maneuvering. Any CAS aircraft, Dagger 16, we are in contact, taking casualties, request immediate fire support, grid Papa Romeo 7865. Rhea keyed her radio. Dagger 16, Gravedigger 11. I'm 5 mics north, inbound your position. Authenticate. Gravedigger authenticates Charlie Lima 9. Get here fast, we're getting hammered. Rhea checked her tactical display, saw the congested airspace, made her calculations. She'd have to thread between the British aircraft and the artillery impact area, come in from the north, and deliver fires without interfering with other elements. Complex but doable. Dagger 16, Gravediggers inbound, marking your position now. Red smoke popped north side of compound. Enemy in buildings to east, west, and south. Approximately 40 hostiles, good cover, well armed. 40 enemies against 1 platoon. Bad odds getting worse every second. Rhea descended to 8,000 feet, spotted the red smoke, started her assessment. The Marines were pinned in an open area with minimal cover, taking fire from surrounding buildings. The enemy had high ground, good positions, and clear fields of fire. This wasn't going to be a quick gun run. This was going to require methodical, building-by-building destruction of enemy positions while avoiding fratricide in close quarters. Dagger 16, Gravedigger. I'll start with the eastern buildings, work west. Keep your people tight and under cover. Roger, Gravedigger. We're as tight as we can get. Cleared hot when ready. Rhea rolled in on the eastern building, a 2-story compound showing multiple heat signatures through her targeting pod. She selected a GBU-38, armed it, got her targeting solution. Released. The bomb impacted the building's center mass, 500 pounds of high explosive delivered with 1-meter precision. The structure collapsed like a house of cards, taking everyone inside with it. Dagger, Gravediggers off target, BDA. Good hit. Eastern building is destroyed. They're still shooting from west and south. She came around again, selected the southern compound, repeated the process. Another bomb, another destroyed building, another dozen enemy fighters eliminated. But the western compound was more complex, closer to the Marines' position, requiring her to come in at a steeper angle to avoid fratricide. She made her approach, refined her targeting, released the bomb. As the GBU-38 fell away from her aircraft, her radar warning receiver screamed. Missile launch. SAM threat. Someone had brought a MANPAD to the fight and fired it during her attack run when she was committed, when she couldn't maneuver aggressively without losing her targeting solution. Rhea had 1 second to decide. Abort the attack and evade the missile, leaving the Marines without support, or complete the attack and hope her defenses worked. She stayed in. Flares popped from her aircraft, dozens of brilliant magnesium stars falling through the sky. She held her dive, watched the bomb impact the western compound, felt the satisfaction of seeing it disintegrate. Then she pulled up hard, max G turn, rolling and climbing simultaneously. The missile came close, too close. It detonated 50 feet behind her aircraft, the shockwave hitting like a hammer blow. The A-10 shuddered, yawed hard left, and suddenly her right engine was on fire. Rhea fought the controls, feeling the jet trying to roll inverted, seeing the fire warning light illuminate with urgent red. She shut down the right engine, activated the fire suppression system, fought to maintain altitude. The Warthog didn't want to fly on one engine at combat weight, but she made it comply, muscle memory and training overriding panic. Gravediggers hit, right engine fire, attempting to maintain control. The controller's voice was professionally calm. Gravedigger, nearest suitable runway is Bastion, bearing 180, distance 40 nautical miles. Can you make it? Rhea checked her altitude, her engine performance, her fuel state. She was at 6,000 feet and descending. Single engine power barely maintained level flight. 40 miles was a long way on one engine with an aircraft that didn't want to fly. Gravedigger will attempt Bastion. Be advised, if I lose more altitude, I'm ejecting over friendly territory. Roger, Gravedigger. Emergency services are being notified. Fly your aircraft, we've got everything else. Below her, Dagger 16 came up on frequency. Gravedigger, Dagger, the western compound is destroyed. You broke the ambush. We're moving to covered positions now. His voice changed, rougher. And if you need a place to land, we'll secure you a highway if necessary. You saved our lives. Rhea smiled despite the fire warning light and the shaking airframe and the very real possibility she was about to eject over hostile territory. Appreciate that, Dagger, but I'm going to try for Bastion. Gravedigger out. She nursed the aircraft south, coaxing every foot of altitude, every knot of airspeed from the remaining engine. The A-10 fought her, wanted to descend, wanted to quit. But Rhea had been flying this jet for 8 years, knew its quirks, knew how to keep it alive when it wanted to die. At 30 miles from Bastion, she was at 4,000 feet and still descending. The math wasn't good. At 20 miles, 3,000 feet. The math was worse. At 10 miles, 2,000 feet. She could see the runway now, could see emergency vehicles lining the approach path. She was going to make it. She was actually going to make it. The landing was controlled chaos. Single engine, hot brakes, fire warning still lit. She touched down hard, deployed her drag chute, felt the Warthog slow with agonizing reluctance. When she finally stopped, 5,000 feet down the runway, emergency crews were already surrounding her aircraft, spraying foam on the burning engine. Rhea shut down the remaining engine, completed her emergency checklist, and sat in the cockpit for a long moment. Her hands were shaking. Her breath was coming in short gasps. She'd just flown 40 miles on one engine with a fire in the other, making an emergency landing at an unfamiliar field while still carrying unexpended ordnance. The adrenaline crash was hitting like a freight train. A crew chief appeared at her canopy, signaling her to evacuate the aircraft. She popped the canopy, unstrapped, climbed down. Her legs barely supported her weight. "Ma'am, are you injured?" "No, I'm fine, just give me a second." She walked away from the aircraft on unsteady legs, watching the fire crews work, watching the foam cover her engine nacelle. Her A-10 sat on the runway, scarred and smoking but intact, still salvageable, still repairable, still ready to fly again once the maintenance crews worked their magic. The base commander approached, a British Royal Air Force colonel who'd been watching the whole drama unfold. "Captain Delacroix, that was extraordinary flying. We've never seen an A-10 make it here on one engine from that distance." Rhea looked at him, still processing, still coming down from the adrenaline. "The jet did the work, sir. I just held on." "Well, you and your jet are welcome here as long as you need. We'll coordinate with Kandahar for recovery operations." "Thank you, sir." She spent the rest of the day being debriefed, examined by medical personnel, and answering questions from maintenance specialists who wanted to understand exactly what had happened to her aircraft. By evening, the full picture was clear. The missile's proximity detonation had sent shrapnel through her right engine, destroying turbine blades and igniting fuel. Only the A-10's separated engine design had kept the fire from spreading to other systems. Any other aircraft would have gone down. That night in temporary quarters at Camp Bastion, Rhea called Lieutenant Colonel Ashford via secure phone. "Sir, Captain Delacroix reporting." "Delacroix, hell of a day. How are you?" "Shaken but functional, sir. The aircraft took major damage but is recoverable. I'll need transport back to Kandahar tomorrow." "Already arranged. But before that, you should know the Marine platoon commander has submitted a personal commendation. He says you stayed in your attack run despite taking missile fire. Says you saved at least 15 Marines." Rhea closed her eyes, remembering the decision, the split second where she chose to complete the attack instead of evading immediately. "I didn't think about it, sir. I just knew they needed that bomb." "That's what heroes do, Captain. They don't think, they act." Ashford paused. "When you get back, take a few days off. Actually rest this time. That's not a request." "Yes, sir. And Delacroix, your father would be incredibly proud. I know I am." The line went dead before she could respond. Rhea sat in her borrowed quarters, staring at the wall, thinking about her father, about the Marines she'd saved, about the sitting damaged on the runway, thinking about the decision to stay in the attack, and whether courage was really about not thinking, or about thinking and choosing to act anyway. 3 days later, Rhea was back at Kandahar, her aircraft having been recovered and transported back for major repairs. Lieutenant Colonel Ashford had made good on his order. She was officially grounded for 5 days, while maintenance worked on Gravedigger 1-1. The forced rest gave her time to think, to process, to write long emails to her mother that tried to explain what she was feeling without revealing how close she'd come to dying. She spent time in the gym, worked out obsessively, trying to burn off the nervous energy that came from being grounded when every instinct said she should be flying. She attended briefings as an observer, watched other pilots launch on missions she could have flown. It was torture, but she understood the necessity. On the 4th day, she received a visitor. Senior Chief Marcus Wright, the SEAL team leader from her first mission with Special Operations, appeared in the operations building asking for her. They met in a small briefing room, Wright in his combat uniform, Rhea in her flight suit. "Captain Delacroix, mind if I call you Gravedigger? Seems more appropriate given what you do," Rhea smiled. "Gravedigger's fine, Senior Chief. Call me Wright, we're past formalities." He sat across from her, studying her with the intensity of someone who'd spent a career evaluating people under pressure. "I heard about Bastion. Heard you took a missile hit and flew 40 miles on one engine." "The A-10 flew itself, I just steered." "Bullshit. I've flown enough with you to know the difference between a pilot and an aircraft. You're the reason that bird made it." He leaned forward. "I came here to tell you something. In 20 years of special operations, I've worked with hundreds of pilots. Fast jets, helicopters, AC-130s, you name it. And you're the best I've ever seen at close air support. Not because you're the fastest or carry the most weapons. Because you understand what we need before we ask. Because you'll stay when it's dangerous and you'll take hits to protect people on the ground. That's rare. That's special." Rhea felt her throat tight. "I'm just doing my job right." "No, you're doing it better than anyone else. And I wanted you to know that before this deployment ends, before you go home and maybe never see you again." He stood, offered his hand. "If you ever need anything, ever, you have my number through Squadron Ops. SEALs take care of people who take care of us." They shook hands and Wright left, leaving Rhea alone with thoughts she wasn't ready to process. The recognition meant more than medals or commendations. It meant the people whose lives she protected understood what she did. That was worth all the danger, all the fear, all the close calls. On the 5th day, her aircraft was ready. The crew chief had worked 18-hour days with his team, replacing the destroyed engine, repairing shrapnel damage, testing every system until everything was perfect. When Rhea arrived at the flight line for her pre-flight inspection, Gravedigger 1-1 looked better than she had in months. "Chief, she's beautiful." The crew chief grinned with pride. "Brand new engine, ma'am. Well, new to us. Pulled it from depot stock and rebuilt it completely. She'll fly like she's 10 years younger." Rhea ran her pre-flight with extra care, checking everything twice, trusting but verifying. When she climbed into the cockpit, it felt like coming home. The familiar smells, the worn seat, the switches and displays she could operate blindfolded. This was her office, her workspace, the place where she did her life's work. The engine start was smooth, both engines spooling up perfectly, all systems showing green. She taxied to the runway, completed her final checks, and took off into clear Afghan sky. The A-10 climbed with its usual determined steadiness, and Rhea felt tension she didn't know she'd been carrying finally release. She was back. Back in the air, back in control, back doing what she was meant to do. Her mission was simple: combat air patrol over Kandahar province, available for tasking as needed. She settled into her patrol pattern, enjoying the simple pleasure of flying, watching the mountains and valleys scroll beneath her wings. At 2 hours into the patrol, the call came. Army convoy hit by IED, casualties reported, enemy maneuvering for follow-up attack. She was closest asset, respond immediately. Rhea turned toward the coordinates, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline, the focus that narrowed the world to radio calls and targeting displays and weapons employment. This was what she trained for. This was her purpose. The convoy came into view. 3 vehicles stopped on a dirt road, soldiers taking positions in defensive formation. But this time, there was no immediate firefight. The enemy had heard the approaching and disappeared into the terrain, knowing what would happen if they stayed exposed. Rhea circled overhead, providing presence, making herself visible, announcing through her mere existence that this convoy was protected. The medevac helicopter arrived 10 minutes later, loaded casualties, departed without taking fire. The convoy recovered its disabled vehicle and continued its mission, never engaging an enemy that had melted away rather than face an A-10. Gravedigger, this is Hammer 3-1. Thanks for the overwatch. Your presence alone kept them from attacking. Rhea smiled. Sometimes the best missions were the ones where you didn't fire a shot, where the enemy knew what you could do and chose survival over glory. Roger Hammer, Gravedigger's heading back to station. Stay safe out there. You too, Gravedigger, you too. She flew back to Kandahar with a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with weapons expended or enemies killed. She protected Americans without firing a shot, simply by being there, by being the threat the enemy respected enough to avoid. That was power too, a different kind of power but just as meaningful. When she landed, the crew chief was waiting. Good flight, ma'am. Perfect flight, chief. She flies like new. She is new in all the ways that matter. Take care of her. Always. The final month of Rhea's deployment fell into a rhythm. Missions flown, lives protected, occasional combat interspersed with long hours of circling and waiting. The Afghan summer reached its peak, temperatures soaring, making operations dangerous for different reasons than winter cold. She flew through it all, racking up missions, building hours, becoming a permanent fixture in the Special Operations Community's request list. The decorations started coming through official channels. The Distinguished Flying Cross for the Convoy Protection Mission, where she took bullet holes. A Bronze Star for sustained combat operations. An Air Medal with Valor for the emergency landing at Bastion. Lieutenant Colonel Ashford presented them in a small ceremony attended by her squadron mates, reading the citations with genuine pride. Captain Rhea Delacroix has distinguished herself through extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight. The words sounded formal, bureaucratic, divorced from the reality of fear and fire and decisions made at 300 knots. But Rhea accepted them with grace, understanding they represented more than personal recognition. They represented every crew chief who maintained her aircraft, every ground soldier who called for her help, every special operator who trusted her overhead. When the ceremony ended, Rivera pulled her aside. "You're going to be famous, you know. When word gets out about what you've done here, every unit is going to want you." Rhea shook her head. "I don't want fame. I just want to fly and do the job. Sometimes you don't get to choose. Sometimes the job makes you famous whether you want it or not." He was right, though Rhea wouldn't fully understand until years later. Stories were already spreading through the military aviation community. The female A-10 pilot who flew danger-close missions for SEALs, who took a missile hit and flew 40 miles on one engine, who'd been shot 14 times and came back for more. Call sign Gravedigger, the pilot who dug graves for America's enemies and brought its soldiers home alive. The stories would grow with retelling, would become legend, would inspire young pilots who wanted to make a difference. But that was future. In the present, Rhea just focused on the next mission, the next flight, the next opportunity to do her job well. 2 weeks before her scheduled return to the United States, she flew her final SEAL mission. Senior Chief Wright's team was conducting a direct action raid on a Taliban commander in the Hindu Kush Mountains, terrain so rough that helicopters could barely operate. They wanted Gravedigger overhead for fire support if needed. Rhea launched at sunset, flying into mountains painted gold and purple by the dying light. Beautiful and deadly, the kind of terrain that killed pilots who got careless. She established orbit at 18,000 feet, watching through her targeting pod as the SEAL element inserted via helicopter and began their approach to the target compound. Wright's voice was calm on the radio, professional updates as his team moved through the darkness. Then everything went wrong. The compound wasn't occupied by a Taliban commander. It was occupied by 30 fighters who'd been waiting, who'd known the SEALs were coming, who opened fire the moment Wright's team approached. An ambush. A trap. And 12 American special operators were in the middle of it. Gravedigger, Python 6. "We're in contact, heavy contact, request immediate fire support." Rhea was already diving, descending through 15,000 feet, the Warthog's nose dropping toward the mountains. Through her targeting pod, she could see the firefight muzzle flashes from 30 positions surrounding the SEAL element. This wasn't a precision strike mission. This was going to be a gunfight, close and ugly, where the difference between success and catastrophe was measured in seconds. Python 6, Gravediggers inbound. Mark your position. IR strobes marking friendly positions. Everything else is hostile. Rhea rolled in on the first pass, lined up on the southern cluster of enemy fighters, squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 spoke with its familiar BRRRT 30mm rounds tearing into the mountainside at 70 per second. The southern position went silent. She pulled up, circled, came around again. Eastern position this time, fighters trying to flank the SEAL element. Another gun run, another 3 seconds of sustained fire, another cluster of enemies eliminated. But there were too many. For every position she destroyed, others kept shooting. The SEALs were taking casualties. She could hear it in Wright's voice and the urgency of his radio calls. Gravedigger, we've got 3 wounded, can't move them. Need continuous fire support. Rhea made her decision. She'd stay low, maintain continuous presence, provide sustained fire support regardless of the risk. She descended to 5,000 feet, circling the battlefield like an iron angel, firing burst after burst into enemy positions. Return fire came up at her, green tracers reaching into the darkness. She ignored them, focused on the targeting, on the radio calls, on keeping the SEALs alive. A bullet hit her right wing, another her fuselage. She kept firing. An RPG detonated close enough to shake her aircraft. She kept firing. For 8 minutes, Rhea Delacroix and Gravedigger 1-1 became the only thing standing between 12 American special operators and death. She expended 1,100 rounds of 30mm ammunition, all 6 Maverick missiles, and 2 GBU-38 bombs. She turned that mountainside into a killing field, methodically eliminating every enemy position with the cold efficiency of someone who'd made peace with what this job required. When the Apache gunships arrived to relieve her, when the medevac helicopters extracted the wounded, when Senior Chief Wright finally called Pythons clear, extract complete, Rhea's aircraft was battered, nearly out of fuel and trailing smoke from a hydraulic leak. But the SEALs were alive. All 12 of them. 3 wounded but none killed. Gravedigger, Python 6, Wright's voice was rough with emotion. I don't have words, you saved all of us. Every single one of us owes you our lives. Rhea's hands were shaking on the stick, exhaustion and adrenaline crash hitting simultaneously. Just doing my job, Python, get your people home safe. Already done. And Gravedigger, when I tell my grandkids about war, I'm going to tell them about you. About the pilot who wouldn't leave, who took fire to protect us, who was the bravest person I've ever known. I appreciate that, Python. Gravedigger's heading home now. Fair winds and following seas. You too, Gravedigger, you too. The flight back to Kandahar was the longest of Rhea's life. Fuel critically low, hydraulics degraded, airframe damaged. She nursed the A-10 home with gentle control inputs, afraid any aggressive maneuvering would cause system failures. The Warthog responded like the wounded warrior it was, flying despite damage that would have killed lesser aircraft. She made it. Barely. Landing with emergency services standing by, fuel gauge reading 0, hydraulics barely functional. When she shut down on the taxiway, the crew chief stood looking at her aircraft with an expression of shocked disbelief. 23 new bullet holes, shrapnel damage across the right wing, hydraulic lines severed, right engine damaged by debris. It looked like Gravedigger 1-1 had flown through hell itself. Ma'am, the chief's voice broke. How are you alive? Rhea climbed down from the cockpit on shaking legs. Because you maintained this aircraft perfectly, Chief. Because the A-10 is tough enough to take this and keep flying, because I had people depending on me. She looked at the damaged aircraft, feeling overwhelming gratitude toward the machine that had brought her home one more time. Can you fix her? Yes, ma'am. I'll fix her if I have to rebuild her from scratch. She earned it. You both did. That night, Lieutenant Colonel Ashford called her to his office. He didn't speak immediately, just studied her with the expression of a commander who understood he'd witnessed something extraordinary. Senior Chief Wright called me personally, said what you did tonight was the most incredible display of close air support he's ever seen. Said you stayed low and exposed, taking fire for 8 straight minutes to protect his team. They needed help, sir. They needed a miracle, and you provided it. Ashford pushed a folder across his desk. This is your squadron performance evaluation. Top marks in every category, and a recommendation that you be given command of your own A-10 squadron when you're promoted to major. Rhea looked at the folder, surprised. Squadron command was competitive, reserved for the best pilots. Sir, I'm honored, but I'm not ready for command. You will be. And when you are, this Air Force needs leaders who understand what close air support really means. Leaders who will fight to keep the A-10 flying despite politicians who want to retire it. Leaders like your father. He stood, offering his hand. 2 more weeks and you go home. Finish strong, Captain. Rhea shook his hand, feeling the weight of expectation, of potential, of a future path she hadn't fully considered. Yes, sir, I will. The final 2 weeks passed quickly. Rhea flew 5 more missions, all routine combat air patrols with no shots fired. She spent time saying goodbye to the crew chiefs, to the special operations units she'd supported, to the other A-10 pilots who'd become family during the deployment. On her last day in Afghanistan, she walked out to Gravedigger 11 for a final inspection. The aircraft was fully repaired, ready for the next pilot, ready to continue the mission. The crew chief was there, performing maintenance with the same dedication he'd shown every day of deployment. She's ready, ma'am, good as new. Better than new, actually. I upgraded some systems while doing the repairs. Rhea ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the familiar rivets, the patches where bullet holes had been repaired. Take care of her, Chief, and the next pilot, too. Always, ma'am, and ma'am, it's been an honor watching you fly, seeing what you and this aircraft can do together. It's been the highlight of my career. The honor was mine, Chief. Thank you for keeping me alive. The flight home was on a C-17 cargo plane, packed with soldiers and Marines and airmen all heading back to the United States. Rhea sat in the military seat, uncomfortable webbing that made sleep impossible, watching Afghanistan disappear beneath the aircraft's wings. She thought about the missions, the lives saved, the close calls. Thought about Senior Chief Wright and the convoy soldiers and the Marines in Sangin, and all the others whose names she'd never know but whose lives she'd touched. Thought about her father, about whether he'd felt this same mixture of exhaustion and pride and relief when his deployments ended. 24 hours later, she landed at her home base in Arizona, stepping off the C-17 into warm desert air that felt alien after 6 months in Afghanistan. Her mother was waiting, older than Rhea remembered, tears streaming down her face. You're home, you're safe, thank God you're home. Rhea hugged her, feeling the months of tension finally release. I'm home, Mom. I'm okay. That night in her apartment that felt strange and too quiet after 6 months of deployment, Rhea pulled up her email. There were hundreds of messages, congratulations from fellow pilots, thank you notes from ground soldiers, official notifications about her decorations, and one email that made her pause, from Senior Chief Marcus Wright, sent to her personal address. Gravedigger, I know you're home now, back to the normal world. I wanted to reach out one more time to say thank you. Not just for the missions, but for showing everyone what dedication and skill and courage really mean. You changed how I think about air support. You changed how I think about what's possible when someone refuses to quit, refuses to leave people behind. My team is nominating you for the Silver Star for that last mission. I don't know if it'll get approved, but you deserve it and more. Fair winds and following seas, right? Rhea closed her laptop, staring at the wall. She was home, safe. The deployment was over, but somehow she knew it wasn't really finished. The missions would stay with her, would shape her future, would become the stories she told when explaining why she flew the A-10, why she dedicated her life to close air support. The stories would grow. The call sign Gravedigger would become legend. And young pilots, women and men alike, would hear about the A-10 pilot who wouldn't quit, who took hits and kept fighting, who dug graves for America's enemies and brought its soldiers home alive. But that was future. For now, for tonight, Rhea Delacroix was just a pilot, home from war, trying to remember what peace felt like. Even if the SEALs looked at each other, and remembered when they heard the A-10 screech return.